Hello and welcome to not the first and not the second, but the 200th episode of Mastering Dungeons that Teos and I have done together. I am Shawn Merwin here with my forever and a day co-host Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, what's
Hello,
up?
Shawn. 200. That's amazing. That's like a gift. Do you need
Yeah,
gifts?
I that's close to 4 years, I think. If my 52 times four math,
Something.
52 goes into 200, about 4 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Uh,
saved my math brain for later in the episode, but it's
okay. Yeah.
incredible. Thank you to everybody for making this possible, because without all the listeners, we'd be like, yeah, okay, I guess this didn't work. And instead, look, let's do another 200.
Exactly. I'm ready. Let's do them all right now. Because I'm only going to Gen Con in a couple of days, so there's
Wow.
nothing to prepare except adventures and panels and podcasting stuff and meeting folks and interviewing and working the booth and all that. So I am trying to pace myself to get to that, to get to Gen Con, and then
Yeah.
all bets are off. Then it's the not the 100-yard dash, it's the 100-mile dash through the convention center.
Blessed are the makers. Thank you, Shawn, for doing that. I wish I could be
Oh,
there to enjoy the fruits of your labors and get me some, maybe gold foil stamp, maybe same, maybe with a book plate, player's handbook in a big line that I maybe couldn't even get into.
it's you got to buy tickets, but you know who doesn't have to buy tickets? It's our listeners. They can listen to us on all the places, and they can talk to us on all the places. And a lot of people have talked to us recently. We've got a few questions to get through here, so let's
All right.
jump right in. Starting with our friend Andy Demps, who is a patron, talks to us via Patreon. Could the regionalism of Living Greyhawk be duplicated, or has the internet shifted things in a way that make it unlikely? You both sound like you thought it was great while acknowledging problems or uneven successes. Could it be? Absolutely. Should it be? That's the question. Um, Living Greyhawk was a product of its time. It came at just the right time with just the right emphasis, just the right rule set. Just, there was a lot of it. Could it be done? It would take a lot of work. Uh, but it it's not a thing that could be duplicated right now for so many reasons. And I started a list, and then the list got so long, I'm like, I don't even know where we could talk about the whole episode. Uh, what Living Greyhawk did at its core was set up an unfair system,
All right. I want to
right?
hear this. Yep.
Okay, it was an unfair system in that you could only play the adventures within your region.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people could only play in their region because of geography.
Yes.
You could play core adventures, you could play
Yeah.
some other adventures, but what you had living within a hour's drive of four different regions was this rich, vibrant, varied
Mm-hmm.
campaign.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you were in a region where you had to drive 5 hours just to get to a convention,
Or
much less
Hawaii.
to or fly, or exactly,
Yeah.
then you're limited.
Mm-hmm.
If your triad, if the group that was
Administering.
in charge of your campaign was not pleasing to you, then not only could you only play core adventures or those adventures, you didn't even want to play those adventures.
Mm-hmm.
The community that was brought to bear through conventions was a huge part of Living Greyhawk. If you could not go to conventions, if you, through any sort of financial, physical, emotional, anything, kept you from going to conventions, it cut into the fun that other people were having.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sense of fairness, right or wrong, is amplified in our current time.
Yeah.
So that right there makes it unsustainable.
Yeah. So where I'm not disagreeing with anything you said. It's all true.
Mhm.
It's all really true. And I traveled a lot around the country and the world, and I saw the incredible disparity between regions. It was really shocking. Like Jeff on the East Coast was amazing. Keelan was an amazing region. These were really rich and everybody intermingled. There was so much fun going on. And then when I moved to Portland, Oregon, Dutchy Ernst, there was a poll on the Yahoo group that said, like, which of these factions do you like? And it listed, the three main factions that were in play and in the fiction, whatever. And then there was the option, don't care or don't understand, don't follow the difference. Number one was don't care. Number two was don't follow the difference. And then the three factions. I mean, that's how, and that was, to me, mind blowing compared to the region where I came from. And I'd been to bad regions, but this was a region that in theory should have been, it was hard. And a lot of it was when you were doled out a region where everything was sort of like really robust and well detailed and sort of status quo, everything's stable. That was really hard to write adventures around that were compelling. But it was the opposite that what people expected, that a place like Jeff, where everything was like, you barely have a town, that actually was rich for change and ideas and gave you a lot of ability. You felt like the admins felt like they could really write stories around that and change the setting up. So yeah, it was very unfair. And part of what's interesting about Living Greyhawk is that almost all of the things that people would complain about were actually the secret sauce, right? Only having 52 time units, so you could only play but so many adventures. Only playing in your region. All those problems are what made it super engrossing, popular for that group. The fact that it was sort of elitist, right? If you knew everything about your region, you were rewarded, right? That investiture that compelled people to get deep and volunteer and get involved. You played all the adventures, well, maybe you'll volunteer at the next convention and start playtesting and all that. And so it was a great culture for the few, which the few were numerous. Let's not say they weren't, but it was problematic that way. And one thing I might say where I kind of, it's not a disagreement, but but the big but would be, I think you could replicate a lot of these things if you said, and this campaign is ending in 3 years. Because you would cut off how long the problems are going to build up, right?
Okay.
The problem in organized play campaigns are an overtime thing. At first, it all sounds great. And then you have these people who tell you, no, you're playing your character wrong. And that difference becomes, it's such a gulf. But if you say 3 years from now, this whole campaign is ending, right? That would probably help greatly to curtail those kinds of situations. And you just know that you're creating an amazing campaign for some people. And it'd be very popular for some people, right? But some people would still be left out of it, and you're just going to live with that.
Except they don't. They don't just live with it.
They'll complain, but they complain anyway.
Well, yeah, they complain, but then they can bring to bear, again, rightly or wrongly, more power than they would have had back in 2000, thanks to the internet. That's and true. Again, for good or for ill, it's a force that cannot be ignored.
Yeah. The other thing that the campaign succeeded on was the power of the triads. It had there was a circle of people who ran the campaign, but then the triads had actually great authority around storytelling, around decision making within their area, and sometimes that created problems, and the circle got involved, and so on. But that amount of power was both amazing and problematic, because some regions would do very terrible things, and then D&D would have to step in and go, stop. Wizards would have to step in and say, stop, you're doing it wrong. And that was a lot of trouble. And overseeing what all these regions did as they loved the power they had and so on, that was a lot of work. And Wizards would never want that again. And I wouldn't want that for Wizards either. And so that's a question that remains to be resolved, because the secret sauce was that empowering of some triads, but it was also what made oversight and all that just a giant nightmare administratively. And you would never want to replicate that for just that reason, right? So that's one that you'd have to work out.
Yep. And the second part of Andy's question, it sounds like Living Greyhawk had a lot of rules. And Adventures League has moved toward minimal organization for an organized play program. Has Adventures League thrown out what made it shine, like exclusive epics, a sense of community, etc., by loosening the rules to appeal to a wider audience? Maybe ignore the salty second half of that double question. No, it is a salty question, but it's a good question.
Yeah.
It's something that anybody who creates an organized play program has to contend with. You have to make, when you create an organized play program, there's basically a checklist of about 200 questions. Do we want this or this? Okay, check. Do we want this or this? Check. And with every single check mark you make, you're delighting some people and you're angering others. And for some, it's just going to be, well, give us what you can and we're going to play it and no questions asked. It's just the nature of the thing. When we switched from Living Greyhawk to Living Forgotten Realms, I remember sitting down with Chris Tulloch in Washington, D.C. at Winter Fantasy, and he's like, okay, here is how we are going to run this campaign. And he started naming things off. And my first reaction was, this is never going to work. And it didn't for some people, and it did for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first taste of recognizing my own biases.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that you can create anything and you will have an audience for it. It's just a matter of who you are trying to serve, for how long, at what cost.
Yeah. I think understanding the levers that you pull don't just do one thing. They do the thing you're trying to do, and then they do other things. And those things will necessarily be things that people don't like. Some people, but often kind of everybody to some extent. There's no set the levers to this level and everything's fine. No, it's not an audio program. It's like a bizarre machine. And when you pull one lever, you've hurt somebody and done something wrong. And you just have to live with it. You have to make the decision of which levers to pull, and that's the way it's going to be. You know, Living Forgotten Realms did things like have regions that were geographic, but you could play anything. And the adventure release schedule was not one that allowed you to say just play in the East Rift, which was my region in Oregon. So my main character that was from the East Rift played like 3 adventures there throughout their entire career. So there was none of that Living Greyhawk feel. That's all the result of those kinds of lever pullings, right? And there's no, I mean, there are answers we may think are better than others, but there's no perfect answer. There's no right in that sense answer to everything. I think that AL has had various visions of what it wanted to be, and that's part of the problem. Its original vision was really very good for where it was starting. It got really big appeal. It did a good job of reaching out to stores, to conventions, to homes, and getting official support from that made it appeal, right? Like you buy the starter set and there's a "We want you" in the Adventures League poster, right? That tells you right then and there, you bought this game, you're looking for how to get started, here's how to find players. The store lookup on the website worked really well back then, does not now and hasn't for some time. And that was really great because it was tied into the remnants of the Encounters program. And so you could really easily find stores in your area that were running games. All that kind of thing worked really well. Over time, the program has wanted to do sort of different things. And that has caused this disconnect, right? So it abandons the regional support. So then, well, what is it selling? If it's a marketing arm, what is it selling becomes unclear. Things like epics are super great for the invested, but they don't mean a lot and actually can confuse and threaten the new player. We do not cater to new players sufficiently with AL at all, right? I've talked and blogged about that a lot. Loosening rules, I think, is more of the fact that over time, the admins have gotten wise to these rules don't really help us, right? Having a 50-page document of how to make a character is not helpful to anybody. And so I think that's generally just been across the board good. The question is what AL does with its adventures, with its structure, whether it focuses on conventions or stores or homes, disproportionately. Those things are are tough and have led to where we are today, which is, I think, a lot of people who've been part of the program feeling not super excited about it and looking for something to change.
Yeah, and you had touched on this previously, but the community aspect of it can be great if it draws people in. And to draw people in, you need to let them contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And that can, as it did in Living Greyhawk, lead to some tremendous community engagement. And even with the Adventures League, they had stores that were represented by different people, and that was great. The problem, though, is that people are people. So for every person who does an absolutely marvelous job and is welcoming and wonderful and supportive and brings in new players, there is going to be a person out there that does the opposite. There's going to be a person out there that turns people away and gets a big head and thinks that it's all about them rather than about the game and the campaign itself. And so that sort of oversight on that becomes hard. And then you get into the legal aspect of it. If this person is working for you, are you paying them? And we have various states with different laws that rightfully protect people from being taken advantage of. But then it also, as with every law, there might be some overreach that stops things that might not be in the bailiwick of an employment, but it still stops things from happening. So
true.
That's one more step in this whole conversation that we're not going to get any deeper into, but it bears to be discussed.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to see the folks at Wizards really sit down and reimagine organized play for, say, 2025, right? New core books are all out, all 3, everything's set. We've celebrated the anniversary. Let's do something new. And I do have some, to me, some keys to the game. One is you've got to reboot everything periodically, because otherwise you get these invested, crusty players that think that everything is there to serve them. And they forget that one day they were that brand new person who was like, oh, this is so cool. Yeah, I'll do whatever you want. I don't, you tell me, I'm just here to play. This is so amazing. And then they become the invested, and they are protectionist of all their beloved whatevers that they happen to like, and their plus whatever items and their power stuff. And you need to get that out of there, or their regions or their organizations, whatever it is that you allow them to do in the game. They will become protective of it, and you have to tell them this will end and it's okay, and in fact it's for your good. And you also have to do that with admins so that they stay fresh and new and hungry. As much as I love all of the admins that are there, I will always say this, and I've said it to myself: you need to step down or change or something. You can come back, but there is that need. And I've seen what new blood does to organized play. It's really very good when it happens at all levels. You need to change things up periodically.
Yep. Next question. This comes to us from Doug599 via YouTube. Doug was commenting on our Planescape adventure review. And so this is very salty, but I think it bears answering.
Yeah.
So if the editors are people who are good at their jobs, then how do mistakes like this happen? How does an adventure with this many issues get approved? I would love to hear the details about a specific example case where a book was made by good creators, ended up badly flawed. And yes, this would probably end up sounding like throwing people under the bus, which I know you can't do. But I'm fed up with being told that WotC has talented creators, and yet we keep getting, I'm going to use the word flawed adventures, so as to not to upset the FCC.
Well, I just want to
know why.
Yeah, I can give the most famous flaw example.
Yeah.
Which is the wizard, right? And so what happened way back in the 2E days is they were making a big, huge book of spells, and they was the Encyclopedia of Magic? Was that the book? Maybe.
Yes. I think so.
I think. And Mike Selinker later kind of shared this because it was under his purview, where he instructed someone who was fairly new that a decision had been made that instead of calling magical spellcasters of the arcane sort mage, they would call them wizard. And please change these in the already edited and approved, ready to go to press book. And you can maybe see where this happens, because spells say things like take 20 points of damage or 2d6 damage. And it became take 2d6 to wizard. As an edit, find, replace changed all mage to wizard, including parts like damage. And this went to press before it was pulled and all of this. And it was a giant embarrassment and problem. And one of the legendary mess ups. How does it happen? Because the process, right? The process was abandoned. The editing happened at one point, and then a change happened after that. The same is true today.
And the other one was you think of all the words with MAGE in it, mirror eye wizard,
Mirror eye wizard
instead of mirror image, right? I mean, and that's so what Teos is talking about there is the process. Now, if you are an adult human with even a loose understanding of how the world works, you already know the answer to Doug's question. Even if you work at a place with just a few employees and a hierarchy of responsibility, then you know what's going on here. You can be awesome at your job, but unless the process is put into place and followed that makes everything work, and someone maintains an eye on this process, and you have regular check-ins, and you continue to evaluate the process and the design goals and the business goals and the partner goals and yada, 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 something is going to go wrong. And I get this question all the time. And this, not to pick on Doug, because this was me 20 years ago. How can this happen? How can this happen? Because I had not lived enough in the world to realize that this happens everywhere. Single day in every single thing.
Yeah. The other thing that's a factor of this is there's a process, and then there's the ability that employees at a company have to speak up. And this is one of the reasons I asked Kyle Brink about this. And there've been some rumors recently that kind of maybe point to this as well. And I asked Kyle, can people at Wizards speak up when something is wrong, regardless of who they are relative to who else is in the room or might hear about this and be offended by it? And he acted like everything was fine. And I said, I don't really hear that that's the case. And he said, nope, we're a great team. Everything's hunky-dory. Okay. You know, maybe it is, and I'm wrong. But to me, these things are indicative of people not being able, don't feel comfortable or educated enough or something like that, right? Like I had a project once, I may have told this story that I'll take really briefly to say that I had a project once that was like a data type thing. And I sat down with the two people who had been told to, these people will do this thing with your data. And I said, here's what we need to do with our data. Here's why, here's what we're doing. And they just stared at me and I said, what did I do wrong? And they said, no one's ever explained to us before what we're doing. Like, okay. And they're like, so this is good. And I'm like, this is good. And they're like, yes, this is great. Now we know why we're doing what we're doing. If you don't have those kinds of conversations, people don't know to speak up or whether they can speak up. And so the process just results in somebody getting to adding words to the Hadozi to fill out space. And it comes out horribly, right? Because you abandon the process. And Planescape, we pointed out those flaws specifically for this reason, not because we want to pick on flaws or make things look negative or whatever, but those flaws are indicative of an abandonment of process. When you see copy paste errors over and over and over again throughout an entire section, like we did in the Planescape setting around those sort of like power type things, no editor misses that. So it just tells you right there, this happened post edit. And a number of the things that we've seen in recent, like the Fendelver and Below or these others, are indicative of a convoluted process where at the last minute, somebody's doing something.
And if we want to go even further, as somebody who has been in charge of 400-page books, the only way to catch all these problems is to follow the process, but to have somebody at the end who says, all right, I push the button and this is going to the printer. That person needs to read that 400-page book, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times. We're talking 50 times.
Yeah.
They will have read that book if they want to avoid even just the most egregious problems, not getting down into a missing comma here or a missing
Right.
parentheses there.
Yeah.
And
You
yeah,
always have flaws, right? I mean, Forge of Foes, we had folks after we'd sent it out to the thousands of people, then we get the reports of like, hey, did you see this on this page? Is that supposed to be? Yeah. And we had teams of people look at it, right?
Mhm.
But nothing happened because of a process. Things happened
Right.
because a human brain can only pick up so much, and that no product survives, comes out perfectly. Like that's fine.
Yep.
But none of them were a process issue, right? They were all just
Yep.
little things that somehow we missed, and we fixed it into the digital version. But it is the way it is, right? That is always expected. Nothing can be flawless, but big fundamental things where the room description doesn't match the box text, or an error multiple times, or even an adventure that loses itself. Those are things that there should be a point in the process where someone goes, hey, everybody, this isn't going on right. We've got the time to fix this because this is how we have our process set up to catch these things. Let's get it right.
And I could get you a perfect book. I could get you a book where every word is spelled right. You are going to be paying 20 times more for that book than you do right now. So it costs to put a process into place. It costs to maintain that process. So also think about that. Do you like your really very cheap books, comparatively speaking, to a college textbook is very expensive, more expensive than your D&D books on your shelf, for reasons. We have other questions to get to, but we are quickly running out of time for our section. So we are going to get to those next time. And now we're going to get to our news and commentary because we have a lot to talk about.
Big news.
Because Hasbro did their Q2 2024 earnings call, and they revealed a bit more than they sometimes do. And Teos did his deep dive into this. So let's talk about this.
I love this stuff, especially when it's pay dirt, because to me this is all like someone just gave you a box of puzzle pieces and can you put it together? Plus, I just love how companies will say one thing and then you're like, really? Is that? So like, for example, when it came to the earnings call, Chris Cox started out with some comment along, this is not a direct quote, but something of the sort of, here we are with another great quarter. I'm like, oh, what? But so where are we at the high level revenue compared to, so this is Q2, right? We divide the year into 4. I think everybody knows that probably. And so here we are at the end of the second quarter, and revenue is down 21%. But
compared to last quarter two,
yes. But a large part of that is from the sale of E1, which still clouds these comparisons and will continue to do so for at least another quarter, I believe. But even if you take out the whole E1 entertainment arm being sold off, revenue is down 6% in Q2, 7% versus a year ago. The decline is largely due to, I think most of you are guessing it right now, toys, the consumer products section, which is down 20%. It was great to read all the ways that they made this seem positive in the calls. The entertainment is 90% down without E1, or 30% down without E1, with or without. So 30% even if you take out the E1 sale, which is not good, but somewhat represents this sort of reshift and declining and whatever. They lost $1 million in entertainment. Interestingly, there's a Transformers movie coming this September, which they did through a partnership license type thing. And they hope that'll boost retail for the 40th anniversary of Transformers. What was good was 20% growth in good old Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming. That segment had its growth driven by Magic the Gathering. Yep. And Monopoly Go and Baldur's Gate 3. And then a $20 million international publishing deal that they didn't ever name as to what that is, but something worth $20 million in international publishing. Chris Cox later added additional information to what was in the slides and the investor summary. Monopoly Go is now over $3 billion in revenue for their partner Scopely. That is on the back of heavy marketing costs. I mean, they're spending, we had heard something like 100 or 500 million in in marketing before, so it's even higher now, I'm sure. But it does make Hasbro the top licensor of video games over the past year. Monopoly Go will generate, for all that $3 billion, roughly $105 million for Wizards for the full year. For Baldur's Gate 3, roughly $30 million in revenue for the year, with the bulk happening in the first half. And this was a level of granularity we've never seen before, which will lead to the end of this piece, some kind of neat stuff. Any thoughts, questions so far, Shawn?
No, I'm looking at that and seeing Monopoly Go will generate roughly 105 million for Wizards for the year.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, how much does just D&D generate for the year? Because that would be a fun thing to compare. That's where my brain just went.
Stay tuned. Yes, it's where my brain went too.
Okay.
So Tabletop, we hear, is up 3%. That's due to Magic the Gathering. It's a 3% growth for the analog side of things, 4% growth for Wizards Digital, and 14% for digital gaming licensing. Looking at the numbers for Wizards specifically, tabletop gaming is $307 million for Q2. So that's a point of analysis to your question, right? We have 105 plus 30 for Monopoly Go and Baldur's Gate. All of tabletop gaming is 307. Digital and licensed gaming is 144.4 million for Q2. Total Wizards revenue of 452 million in Q2. Total operating profit is 247. So not quite that profit margin we'd seen some years, but still that's a very strong margin for a lot of businesses. Everything else was a loss. so that was the bright side, was Wizards. And if you think back to the years ago with the Fox, Alta Vista Fox group saying, spin off Wizards. I mean, there's logical reasons why Hasbro doesn't want to do that, because you imagine what the company would look like without it. But they weren't completely wrong back then to really go, what we're seeing is this real difference between this part of the company and the rest. And it's been more and more true as time went on.
What's interesting is their operating profit is up 74% due to the digital licensing, but lower royalty expenses and lower expenses overall. So what does that mean? It means all those people that were laid off, they are now being shown, investors are now being shown, look at our operating profit. Look how much it's up. We have a bright future ahead of us where we're going to have to hire back people to do the work that we're planning to do. And then the operating profit will go down. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this whole thing about, oh, look, another successful quarter, we're still talking about really not super great numbers. And yet what they did was beat the expectations. And Wall Street loves this, right? Where the company warns we're going to have a really tough time, and then they do better. And this is just like in high school where like the bad kid, and maybe you were them, bless you if it was you got 1A, and the teacher is so proud and beaming and gives you the spotlight moment. And all the kids who routinely do hard work and get A's are like, what just happened? What, this kid? Like, why are we talking about this kid? I got an A yesterday with my blindfold on. Well, that's how stocks work. Stocks are all about that bad kid in school getting an A and announcing it with trumpets.
Yep. Yeah. Jim Cramer's there banging on his little bell and screaming, bye.
They still emphasize savings. So like you said, Shawn, they love talking about, $40 million worth of saving, 90 millions to date. And that's layoffs and cost cutting measures and whatever's, even though, of course, there's always excesses all over the place. They have now raised expectations for the year to see Wizards of the Coast down just 1% to 3%. And what this really is what they're saying is, and it just shows you where all the money comes from. Baldur's Gate and Monopoly Go are slowing, but they're not slowing as badly as we thought they would. That's really what that's about. They say that for Baldur's Gate, the revenue, and this I thought was fascinating, most of the revenue for the game was in Q3 of last year. And then it has been slowing, and they call it a decay. So all of Wizards' revenue decreases because that one game, it was so big in Q3, and then just continues to decay without anything else to replace it, right? That's where the whole decision around no DLC or Larian Studios saying no Baldur's Gate 2, then there's no, or 4, there's no expectation of this thing just magically propping back up. So we just are going to see revenues decrease because Baldur's Gate 3 is so much bigger than, D&D print stuff.
Yep.
So in all of the official stuff, Shawn, not a single mention of the 2024 core books or Gen Con or anything like that, right? That stuff is all, at least from those ports, inconsequential. The investor call, due to questions and so on, we got a little more. And in fact, we got a fair bit more compared to most calls because we've started to be in the territory where D&D doesn't get mentioned. And so it did get mentioned, and in a number of ways that were very interesting. One was the hiring of John Haidt as president of Wizards of the Coast and Digital Gaming. Chris Cox, CEO, said the company's earning in this earnings call said it continues to invest in the digital gaming portfolio. So he highlighted that hiring as part of this and said, quote, between our board move and talent we brought on board, most recently with John, we're going all in on becoming a digital play company.
And then the internet exploded. Then we get all the reaction videos and so I want everyone to stop. Just stop. In 1976, you could buy your set of books and your dice, and you could play D&D with those forever. There are still people playing using their 3 AD&D books or their box set. In 2024, you are going to be able to buy 3 core books and dice, and you are going to be able to play D&D forever. In 2076, you are going to be able to buy a set of books and dice and play D&D forever. Cox is saying this because he needs the investors to keep investing.
Yeah.
Working on digital things is not the end of D&D. They are still going to publish books, probably in the same amount that they have been forever. Will there be digital things? Yes. Will making digital things make the game worse? Probably not. It might make tweaks to it, but it's still going to do all of those things. When he talks about digital things, he's talking about accessories. He's talking about video games. He's talking about D&D Beyond subscriptions and virtual tabletops. It does not change the game that we have all been playing.
Yeah, he's not even addressing that.
Right.
Now, I will say there's been Ben Riggs has been sharing information that, it's always hard to assess, but saying that internally there have been folks high up that really wanted to change, say, whether print even exists. I mean, one, those are unconfirmed rumors, but two, that will happen at companies, right? That there are always folks who will come in with a new view, a different perspective that may challenge the old. That's just going to happen. And D&D is the kind of company or game, product, line, whatever you want to think of it as, that will have to survive those kinds of attacks, right? The same way that Marvel Comics have to survive. Surely someone's saying, why are we even doing comic books anymore? I can show you where the money is. It ain't over there. Well, that must happen, right?
It would be malpractice. It would be malpractice if those questions didn't come up.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. You have to ask those questions, and it's in some ways it's healthy. It's healthy if you can survive them, right? I have been at companies where so many people were new, and I'll just say bad, that they would question our assumptions not with wanting to hear an answer, but to hear themselves say the answer they already imagined was true and didn't want any data otherwise. And that led to dark times at the company where I worked. But that's where you're hoping that's not the case, right? And we don't know if it is one way or the other. But those challenges will always happen. So here we are. I agree with you. Back to your point, Shawn. When Chris Cox is saying we're becoming a digital play company, he is answering all the things we just finished talking about, that all the revenue comes from these digital sources. And they are following the money, which is what they're supposed to do, right? To employ people and pay salaries and all that sort of stuff and achieve the growth that allows them to exist. Yay, capitalism. They will pursue those kinds of digital strategies, right? They need the next Baldur's Gate 3.
Mhm. Yeah, and the next Monopoly Go, and the next
Yeah.
Magic the Gathering lunchbox, and
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. And they
Uh,
said, yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, he said they want to ship 1 to 2 new digital games per year, starting as early as late 2025 or early 2026.
Which is that's a lot, but maybe, right? If they, especially if some of it's licensed and so on, then yeah.
Mhm. And games like Baldur's Gate 3 show us what the future looks like.
Exactly.
That's a quote. I almost games like Baldur's Gate 3 show us what the future could look like,
Yeah.
because the future never follows the same pattern that you
Yeah.
think it will.
No, never. But I mean, imagine if we could have a couple of different Baldur's Gate 3 like experiences, right? Not the same game 3 times, but a D&D this way and a D&D that way, and maybe, something else over here that are, different types of digital games that were as exciting as Baldur's Gate or even close to it, right? Can't expect Baldur's Gate 3 every time. Wow, think of all the people that would come into D&D to play the tabletop version, right? So it doesn't have to be a dark future. It can actually be a very bright future if it's done well. So Chris Cox went on to talk more about D&D on this earnings call. He said, within D&D, we are, and this was kind of cool. Here's your tabletop piece. Within D&D, we are seeing solid pre-orders for the 2024 core rules book for the revised and expanded 5th edition. Ooh, look at that. D&D
Nice.
also shows how we've increased digitization across our portfolio. Digital revenue already accounts for over half of the mix due to the success of D&D Beyond. And that is an earth-shattering bit of data right there.
Mm-hmm. That begins to let us chip away, if true, at some of the other numbers that we've seen.
Indeed.
Because we could never separate the two when we just got that big block of this is how much revenue D&D has made.
Yeah, but now we know it's at least half. And so what that means is, folks are truly ordering from that D&D Beyond page in big numbers. I'm sure it includes things like, you can go to Amazon and buy through D&D Beyond. There's some complicated, weird stuff like that, but they're seeing a fair amount come through. And that is propped up by things that we've heard, like Ray Winninger has responded to some of the numbers I've given and said, well, you're not counting all the digital stuff going on. And so he's strongly hinted at, your blind side, Teos, and all the numbers you're putting together is you don't know what's going on that digital side, which I absolutely do not. So this gives us a little bit of wind into that. And also that, Chris Cox is paying attention to the 24 core rules book release, and it is worth mentioning to this. So then he also said, next week at Gen Con, fans can expect to see more of our 3D role-playing sandbox experience built on Unreal Engine 5, bringing players' favorite franchises to life across PC, console, and mobile. That was interesting. Favorite franchises. Isn't it just one? Or is this going to support more than D&D?
Yeah.
We look forward to getting it.
Hopefully. And days.
Discord users, our eagle-eyed Discord users, have noticed that the paths at D&D Beyond have changed, the URLs, to sort of specify D&D and 5e. So could it be that more stuff is going to be through there? He could just be simply talking about D&D Beyond has been allowing for Magic the Gathering, like secret layer sales, to be through that platform instead of the old platform, apparently. So there are some changes there that maybe they're trying to pivot this somewhat, which honestly would probably, as long as it doesn't muck everything up, could probably be really good for D&D as well, because it means someone looking at Magic sees D&D as well, or more chances of that. But he says we look forward to getting it in gamers' hands later this year. So maybe there's a wider beta release, because we'd been told the release of the virtual tabletop would be in 2025. And these come out later this year. So we're already in August, around the corner. So, okay.
And then we got another interesting quote that I want Teos to talk about, which is D&D Beyond already represents our largest direct-to-consumer platform with 18 million registered users.
That is fascinating because 18 million, this is another number that we can log against. So back in 2022, when D&D Beyond was purchased by Wizards for 146.3 million, there were 10 million users. Then we were told that in October 2023, it was 12 and 13 million in December 2022. October 2022, then 13 million in December 2022. So that jumping to 18, even if those are not paying customers, certainly are not all. That's still really big growth of accounts, and nowhere remotely near a decline, right? Like it's one thing if you say like, oh, it grew 13 to 14, you go, is that real? But 18, that's growth. And he calls it, right, that largest direct-to-consumer platform. So that maybe it's more important than Hasbro Pulse, which has been a big deal for Wizards. Pulse sells high-cost items like, an alien-style pulse rifle done up in various colors, and you pay big money for it because you're a hardcore Alien fan or something like that. But maybe that is fewer fans buying those things. So we don't know the revenue, but it sounds like the most users, right? And that's definitely worth their focus. So what will that focus do? We'll have to find out over time.
That leads to a bigger question, which is, so how big is D&D, Teos? And how do you figure that out?
Every quarterly release, I try to figure this out. And a friend of the show, Scipio, and I will trade messages on Discord trying to pinpoint, do we have enough? And we think this time we have enough to guess the answer of D&D Tabletop's revenue because of the extra bits they disclose this time. And Wizards, you can think of, what is Wizards of the Coast? It's these 5 areas. Magic Tabletop, so the paper cards. Magic Digital, which is Magic Arena. D&D Tabletop, the printed D&D books you love. D&D Digital, D&D Beyond. And then digital licensed gaming. Baldur's Gate 3, Monopoly Go, other stuff. The data is reported in buckets. So they'll do things like combine all of tabletop or, and licensed gaming. And so it's always hard to parse it. But this time they said enough to help you extract it out. Wizards total for the first half of the year, Q1 and Q2, is 768.3 million. Magic is 573.9 of that. Licensing, from what they told us, is around 65 million. That tells us D&D is about 129.4 million. And since they said this time that D&D Beyond is roughly half of that, a little over maybe, you're talking about 64.7 million for tabletop paper and 64.7 for D&D Beyond for a half a year. Now, we did also include in our math this overseas 20 million one-shot deal. So maybe that changes it to more like 54.7 million for each. So it's likely that D&D tabletop print stuff is between 52 and 65 million. And same thing for D&D Beyond. Doubled, that's 104 to 130 million for each, which is actually totally in line with the 2022 Forbes estimate that D&D before D&D Beyond was around 100 to 150 in annual revenue. So 104 to 130, 100 to 150 works really well. So that seems pretty plausible as where D&D is. And now we can go back, Shawn, to your question, right? Which we're looking at and saying like, okay, after all that billions and the Scopely deal and everything on Monopoly Go, where for the year it's generating 105 million. Well, D&D is about 104 to 130 itself. So it's not bad.
Yeah.
Right? It's not nothing.
It's not nothing, but it's also not. You're looking at one license of one game making 105 million versus all of D&D tabletop making maybe about the same.
Yeah. But some of that, but it does show, some of that is a bias of making investors happy, which is their job on these calls, right? Literally their job on these calls is to drum up the excitement of Monopoly Go, even though maybe D&D is actually a little bigger for the year after it's all said and done. Of course, what they also have to look at is the D&D only shows so much growth promise, which 2022 and now seem to be pretty much the same. And the Monopoly Go is unbelievable growth compared to anything they were doing before. So if they can do more of that, that's a lot easier to replicate than making D&D. You can't double D&D, right? At least there's no path anyone has found to truly do that. And you can't double D&D Beyond, right? Maybe we've doubled. You could argue doubled it through D&D Beyond, but you can't do a whole lot more than that, one would think. So they'll try with the virtual tabletop, I imagine.
That's true. It's true. We'll see what.
Yeah. One last thing here from Scipio. He had a very sharp observation. He said, in the middle of Q3 is when the player's handbook will be released. So you can play along with us when we talk about Q3, or you see the reports next time when that finally comes out. Do we get mentioned in the press release as a smashing success? Right? If so, those numbers were worth mentioning. If you get a small positive mention in the Wizards of the Coast section of the presentation, it was decent. And if it doesn't get mentioned at all, those are the dark times. So we now, we'll look forward to Q3 because of this.
There you go. Well, we did a super deep dive into that topic. So we've only got one more bit of news that we'll cover this week, which is MCDM, the RPG, now has a name. Another internal playtest packet for Patreon supporters has gone out. And now the name that's attached to the MCDM role-playing game is called Draw Steel. DrawSteel. Yeah. And hopefully we'll get a chance to play test that at some point in the near future. I'm looking forward to seeing what the newest incarnation of that game is. And if we do so, we will take some notes and we will share them as much as we can based on whatever NDAs are involved.
Yep.